Ducks fans, are you ready? You are listening to the Ducks and Pucks podcast with your hosts, Mike Walters and Eddie Jones. This is the number one home for Anaheim Ducks talk and analysis. Here we go.
Well, welcome to the show. This is your host, Mike Walters, along with my co-host, Eddie Jones, and we have a good show for you guys this week. A lot of news for the Ducks, some injury news that we didn't cover after the last podcast that came out, and actually some stuff that's come up this week. Some changes in the coaching a little bit that we'll go over. Also some draft stuff too, Eddie. So we have a few things to cover. We'll talk about the Stanley Cup a little bit, as well as Nashville and Pittsburgh battle it out. But some changes and some extensions too with the coaches, Eddie. It looks like Randy Carlyle got an extension for another year, 2018 to 2019, with an option to sign on for the following year. So it looks like they're going to keep him, but they also ended up letting Paul MacLean walk, and they let his contract expire, and he's left the team.
Yeah, and I think that was a little bit surprising, more so than Carlisle getting an extension. I think it was a well-deserved extension. You know, he had a great season, a good playoffs. Obviously disappointing in the end to go out in the Western Conference Final, but I don't think you can put all the blame on him. I think there was a lot of games that, you know, he made some good decisions switching on the lines. We talked about it during the playoffs where, you know, he kind of changed the tide of the game by putting some guys together, and the Ducks ended up winning some of those games. So I think he deserves the extension, but, you know, I think a lot of the reason that MacLean is gone is because of the struggle for the special teams, especially this season and definitely into the playoffs. You know, it's hard to win when your power play is just above 12% in the playoffs. You know, nothing was going right for them on the power play, and he has to be partially to blame for that. And I think it's a little bit disappointing that he's not going to be back. But, you know, we'll have to see if either Yanni or Preston will step up and take the duties for special teams, or if they go out and find another guy. I think you know, it's going to be an important thing for them. Obviously, a lot of it falls on the team and the players themselves for them to execute on the power play. But if you don't have a good system going, you're not going to get a lot of chances. So I think that's going to be a big thing for them to address, definitely going into next season.
Yeah, it was frustrating, you know, looking at the playoffs, how the Ducks did on the special teams, because they were, you know, pretty good during the regular season, but in the playoffs, they were 7 of 54 on the power play, like you mentioned in the 12% there, which was ranked 13th out of the 16 teams. And obviously all the teams don't play the same amount of games, but just based upon the teams that were in there, that's where they ranked. The penalty kill was at 76.6%, which was 14th of all the teams that were in the playoffs as well. So really low, you know, on both those numbers at the bottom. And yet the Ducks still, you know, they almost made it to the Stanley Cup, Eddie. I mean, they were only, you know, a couple of games away there. They were very close to forcing it, you know, a game 7, tying that game 6 up late. So you have to think if the Ducks would have been a little bit better on the special teams, especially in that series against Nashville, we'd be talking about them playing the Penguins right now instead.
Yeah, and, you know, a little bit better is 5-6 goals more on the power play, and those are 5 or 6 goals where, you know, it could be a game-winning goal. It could be a game-tying goal that leads to you, you know, eventually getting momentum and winning the game. And those are important goals that you need to score definitely in the playoffs. And even the penalty kill at times wasn't that great. It picked it up later on in the playoffs. But, yeah, I mean, to have a power play near the bottom of the league in the playoffs and to make it to the Western Conference Final, I mean, that's surprising enough. And like you said, I mean, you have a couple extra goals on the power play, you could win a game that you needed to win. You could have won game 6, or you could win game 5, and then you're not on the brink of elimination, and that's something the Ducks didn't have, and it's something they're going to have to address going to next season. I'm sure they will. Obviously, it depends on what players you bring in, who's running the power play, etc. But you know, the core is still there, and I think, you know, this is a talented offensive team, and definitely missing guys like Raquel and Eves had to factor into a poor power play during the playoffs as well.
Yeah, absolutely. And, you know, the Ducks are going to try and figure out what they'll do as far as the coaching situation of special teams. We don't know exactly yet. As you mentioned, Yanni and Preston are going to remain as the assistant coaches. Todd Marchant is going to still do the player development and special projects. So we don't know exactly who's going to come in. I mean, one name that, of course, this name comes up a lot, and some people mentioned to us, was Scott Niedermayer. Obviously, one of the greats when it came to special teams play. But we don't know if he wants to take, more of an active role like we've seen before. He's, been more on the back pedal and doing more of the things on a more lower role, I guess you could say, not as involved. So I don't think he would be the one that would do it, even though, I mean, I think he would be great. So we'll have to wait and see, Eddie. But that's where we're at right now with the coaching situation. And the Ducks are going to have Carlyle at least for a little bit longer. And we'll go from there. And like you mentioned, it's about the team. And I know some people ask some questions, and we'll kind of talk about this too, about whether or not the Ducks are going to rebuild or try and do anything different. And I don't think they're going to really rebuild, Eddie. I mean, they're pretty much keeping all the coaches the same. Obviously, MacLean's gone. But in terms of the players, I think the team's pretty much going to stay, similar to what it is now.
Yeah, I think it's a little early to talk about rebuilding. I mean, I can understand the guys that are getting older, the core of this team, and you look at the beginning of the season, you say, well, I mean, we were all surprised to see them even make it this far with the guys that we had. But I think Getzlaf proved that he can still play. Kessler played great during the regular season. Didn't really show up a lot during the playoffs, but he can still fulfill his role for at least 2 or 3 more seasons. Obviously Perry struggled all season long, had a couple big overtime goals in the playoffs, but he's going to need to step it up next season. But I don't think it's a rebuild yet. The defense is one of the youngest in the league. Obviously, John Gibson's only 23. You've got young guys like Raquel and Silverberg in the lineup. Richie's young. You've got guys like Steele and Jones coming up in the next few years as well. So I don't think it's a rebuild yet. Maybe a retool, bringing in another young forward, hopefully in a trade that we'll talk about later on in the podcast. That could help extend your window a little bit. But it is closing. But no, our rebuild, I don't think we're at that point just yet.
Yeah, I agree with you, Eddie. And I think, like you touched on a little bit earlier, too, not to make excuses for the Ducks, but, injuries did hurt this team. I know Nashville's going to, sit there and talk about Fisher and all these other things and how they, had some players hurt. But, the Ducks had, no Eves in the Western Conference Final, no Raquel for Game 5 and 6, and pretty much Gibson, too. I mean, they lost him early in Game 5, and we all saw, what happened there when Bernier came in. So the injury bug has kind of been a big thing with this team. When we had our last podcast, we talked a little bit about it, but all these injuries came out after the fact. So obviously, most of you listening have heard all of these already. There are some updates that we can give you that are new, but some of the things that we heard, of course, was Raquel had a high ankle sprain. That's why he was out. We heard about Patrick Eves. He also had an ankle sprain and a bone bruise. So that was the things that kept him out. And from what we heard, he tried to get back out there a couple different times, Eddie, tried to push it and had some setbacks. So I think, unfortunately, he just, we wanted him out there. Obviously, he wanted to be out there, but he just wasn't at that level where he could go out there and not, be like a handicap to the team.
Yeah, and really, I mean, you don't want a guy out there who's not 100% or can't play close to being 100%. Obviously, a big story of the playoffs was Erik Karlsson going out and playing with 2 hairline fractures in his foot, but he looked like he was still able to play. Obviously, he probably had a lot of painkillers going for his foot, so he wouldn't be able to feel any of the pain. But if a guy doesn't feel he's ready, there's no point in pushing him out there and risking the fact that he might get more injured. And I think obviously it sucks that for Eves, the fact that he's an unrestricted free agent, it's going to be tough for the Ducks to bring him back. He was having such a great season, gelled well with Getzlaf, and I think they really, really could have used him. But again, you don't want to push a guy and injure him more and make the recovery time even more for this guy. So I think it was the right call for him not to play. It's disappointing, but yeah, I mean, the injuries just kept coming. It was Eves and Raquel, and then we hear about Bieksa and Gibson and Vatanen and Lindholm, and it just seemed to keep piling up after the playoffs had ended.
Yeah, I mean, you mentioned it. Bieksa had a torn MCL. I mean, and he's got back out there still for some of those games. Gibson had the hamstring injury, affecting his lateral movements. Thompson with a hairline fracture. So you had all kinds of guys playing with all kinds of injuries. And obviously Nashville does too, and they're not going to announce it till their thing's over, and I'm sure Pittsburgh does, just like every team does. They all have injuries. But it just seemed unusually high for the amount of players the Ducks had hurt. And we recently heard from one of the Swedish newspapers that Lindholm had his surgery and it went well. But now they're saying the recovery time for Lindholm, instead of being 4 to 5 months of rehab, Eddie, they're talking about 5 to 6 months, which is very unfortunate because based upon that timeline, he wouldn't be back till probably November at the earliest of the next season.
Yeah, and hopefully, it goes well and the time shrinks. Obviously, it's not set in stone that it's going to be 5 to 6 months. A lot of times you hear a guy's going to be out for an entire year and then he comes back for playoffs and whatnot. And, I think, he's got the whole summer to prepare and get ready for next season. And, hopefully he cuts his time down and he's ready to go in October. If not, then hopefully it doesn't extend into the 6 months and go into December. Then you're missing him for at least 20 to 30 games, and that's going to be difficult for the Ducks to replace him. Especially the fact that we're going to have to trade either one of Vatanen or Fowler or Manson to avoid them getting picked up by Vegas in the expansion draft. So it's going to be tough to replace those guys. Obviously, we've got Theodore who could step in. Montour is most likely going to play next season as well. And you got to remember, too, you've got a guy like Jacob Larsson who played a couple games at the beginning of the season with the Ducks. He's always a guy that could step in and fill a role. And he's got another year of experience under his belt in the Swedish Hockey League. So it'll be interesting to see if he can come in for however many games Lindholm is out and play a significant role for the Ducks.
Yeah, and some people asked about Larson this last couple of weeks too, and there's a good chance that he can make it too because the way things are going now, and we'll go into the draft in a little bit, but the Ducks are going to have to look at moving some people around. You and I have talked about this a couple times on the podcast, and another thing affecting it is Lindholm had his surgery this last week, but so did Vatanen. And initially, when they had said Lindholm was going to be out 4 to 5 months, Bob Murray was saying Vatanen was going to be out longer. So I don't know what the recovery time exactly is going to be for Sammy, but it's probably going to be 5 or 6 months at least too. So the Ducks are going to have to try to figure out something here, Eddie, because if they want to move, Vatanen, it's going to be interesting because he may not be able to play for the first month or two of the season as well.
Yeah, and from what we were all suggesting, we thought that maybe that could hurt his trade value. Obviously, with the guy not being available possibly for the first month or two of the season, that's going to be difficult for a team that is in win now mode, and they're going to want him to be available at the beginning of the season. And like I said with Lindholm, there's still a chance that he could have a really progressive summer and come back and be ready for October. But there was an article that TSN released the other day, and I think LeBron also said it doesn't look like Vatanen being injured is really affecting his trade value. Teams that were interested are still interested, so that's good news for the Ducks. And I think they eventually still move a defenseman if it is Vatanen. I don't think his injury really hampers that fact. Obviously, it plays a little bit of role, but I don't think it. A team that's going to be trading for him is going to have him for the next 3 or 4 seasons anyway with his contract at a pretty good cap hit, just under $5 million. So they're investing in him now and in the future as well.
Yeah, and the word on the street that I heard, and obviously this isn't official or anything, but it sounds like the Ducks are listening to other teams as far as making offers on Vatanen. So whether or not that gets done or not, we'll have to wait and see. But it sounds like the Ducks are open to moving him, which kind of talking about all our draft stuff. A lot of people have questions about that, but we've gone into the formula, obviously, that we're looking at the Ducks doing the 7 forwards and 3 defensemen. If the Ducks are able to trade Vatanen, and Bieksa waives his no movement clause, which that's coming up here soon in the next couple of weeks, they're going to talk about the players that are going to waive for purposes of the expansion draft. But if the Ducks do that, Eddie, then you've got Lindholm, Fowler, and Manson hopefully be the 3 that you protect on defense. And then, like we said, on offense, the Ducks obviously have to do Perry, Getzlaf, and Kessler because of their no movement clauses. And then they'd be able to keep Raquel, Silverberg, and Cogliano. So that would be, great for the Ducks because they'd be able to keep most of the guys. They might have to expose Vermont and a couple others, but the core of the team would still be able to get through this draft, without really losing someone significant. Though Patrick Reeves could be one of those to go to Vegas.
Yeah, I think they're actually in a pretty good position if they trade Vatanen. A lot of teams, you look at them and they've got to expose some pretty good players, and there's not really any way they can work around it through trades or anything like that. The Ducks, even with protecting Perry, Getzlaf, Kessler, Raquel, Silverberg, Cogliano, they still have that one extra forward spot that they can use if they do bring in an impactful forward for, in a trade for Sammy Vatanen or a trade for Cam Fowler or whatnot. They still have that extra slot that they can use that can go to that guy, and I think that's a huge advantage to have. Obviously, that gives you the opportunity to go out and get that forward. Obviously, then you expose a guy like Vermette, but I don't think that's a huge loss for them if Vegas does come out and get him. Then you just go about and probably re-sign Nate Thompson and fill your fourth line center role. So I think they're in a pretty good position. Obviously, like we were mentioning a couple minutes ago, the injury to Vatanen does kind of hamper the situation, but the Ducks have a lot of room to work around before the expansion draft, and I'm sure they'll be able to get something done.
And part of the expansion draft too is it's kind of unique, Eddie. I'll let you go over the timeline of what's coming up for people, but in the situation of, say, Patrick Eaves, say Vegas does want to pick him because he's an unrestricted free agent. If Vegas does take him, then that's the pick that they get from the Ducks. So that's kind of where they're at. And unfortunately, the way the timeline works, and I'll let you go into it right now, the Ducks aren't going to be able to re-sign Eaves. Initially. I mean, I don't know if they would be able to anyways with the money situation, but the way it works out, it's kind of a weird situation. But Vegas is going to have a shot at a lot of UFAs and unprotected RFAs.
Yeah, so this is really the whole timeline for the expansion draft. So on June 17th, the teams will submit their protection lists, and then on June 18th, the next day at 10 a.m., those lists get released to the public. We get to see who the Ducks protected, who every team protected, and who's available for Vegas to pick. And then from then on, from the 18th to the 21st, this is what you were talking about here, is Vegas has the opportunity, it's essentially a free agent window for them, where they'll be able to negotiate with UFAs and unprotected RFAs. And say if they decided to negotiate with Patrick Eaves and they said, hey, okay, we're going to sign you, then that would count as their pick from us. So they can't sign a bunch of UFAs and then also still pick a player from us. If they do sign an unrestricted free agent or a restricted free agent, that counts as their pick from that team. And that is the 3-day period from the 18th to the 21st. After that period ends, also on the 21st, Vegas will submit their player selections, and then later that day, on the same day as the award ceremony, their team gets released to the public. So it's a hectic 4 or 5 days for the people and for George McPhee and everybody at the Golden Knights organization. It's going to be a crazy few days for them and selecting their team and talking to a bunch of free agents and it's going to be crazy, and it's going to be interesting to see who they pick. And I'm really excited to see their team. This hasn't happened since I believe in 2000 was the last time it happened. So, I was too young to really remember that. So it'll be interesting to see how this process works and who they end up getting on their team. They look like they're going to be a pretty decent team, and it's going to be interesting, especially for Ducks fans, because this is a team we're going to be seeing a lot next season because they're in the Pacific Division.
Oh yeah, road trip, baby, road trip to Vegas. That's what we were talking about. We're actually looking into that too. It's kind of funny you bring that up. I forgot about it, but we are looking into next year. We'll see how the schedule works out, but we may do some kind of a road trip event where we'll try to get tickets. Group tickets, whatever, at some kind of price or whatever, and then maybe we can get a whole bunch of people to go out there, which would be fun. We do the watch parties and whatnot throughout the season and the playoffs, and this may be another thing to add, and just to hang out with all of you as well, which will be something to look for. So we're looking into that, and we'll check it out. One thing I think is interesting too about this, Eddie, is this whole window, the 18th through the 21st, because Vegas is going to talk to some of these players, but these players don't necessarily have to go to Vegas. They can talk to them, but they might be like, you know what, I don't want to go to this new team. I either want to go to the highest bidder or a contender or something like that. So I really expect a lot of craziness from the 18th to the 21st.
Yeah, you could expect that a lot of the high-level free agents, a guy like Kevin Shattenkirk, maybe even a guy like Patrick Sharp or Alexander Radulov, that they most likely won't go to Vegas. Vegas will have the option to talk to them, and I'm sure they'll go and talk to a guy like Kevin Shattenkirk. I think everybody will want to talk to a guy like Kevin Shattenkirk if they can afford him, and Vegas has the money to move around. They'll be taking on some contracts for sure, but they should have a significant amount of cap space anyway. So that will be an option for them. I honestly don't think it's a destination, but they have that time in the 3-day window to convince him to go there. And I think it definitely is an interesting situation. They have, first dibs on any of these guys if they decide that they want to woo them over and play in Vegas. It's a difficult task. This isn't going to be most likely a competitive team next season. They might be, they probably won't be bottom feeders, but they're going to be close to it, and it's going to be difficult for them to get a guy like Shattenkirk or Radulov or Sharp over to their side.
The whole expansion thing, I think it's just difficult in general, Eddie, because even like when you go back to the Ducks in Florida, back in '93, and you go to all these other teams, is you're getting a bunch of players and you're putting them on a team, and 90% of them haven't played with the other players. Maybe there's a couple that played on some teams together, whatever, but a majority of them haven't played together. So, trying to get that team to gel together when it's just completely new, I just think it's extremely difficult, especially for the first several months of that season.
Yeah, I think there's obviously a lot that goes into it. I think. A lot of these guys they're professional hockey players. Don't get me wrong; they're going to go and they're going to play hockey. But you're right; it's getting a system that's going to work for. You're literally getting one guy from each team that's played in, and arguably they've all played in different systems. And now you've got to bring them all together under a new coach and get them playing all in the same way. So that's going to be difficult, and you're going to see that at the beginning of the season, especially the fact that this team's just going to be coming together on June 21st. It's a lot to work to, and we've seen it with the Ducks bringing in a new coach, and they've struggled at the beginning of the season, and most of those guys have been there for a long time. So, and you see teams who will bring in 3 or 4 new guys in free agency or through trades, and they'll struggle at the beginning of the season. This is 30 new guys essentially that you're bringing together, and you're going to be playing in your lineup. So it's going to be interesting to see how they work it out. Obviously there's most likely going to be struggles at the beginning of the season, but Gerard Gallant's a good coach, and I think. If they bring in the right group of players, they could have a pretty good start here.
Yeah, and you talk about players and them pulling, obviously they're going to have to look towards the minor leagues, and they announced this week that their ECHL team is going to be the Quad City Mallards. So it was kind of interesting, Eddie, to see that team out there. I was referring to it as the Quack City Mallards, but you would think that team should be one with the Ducks. Maybe we give them the Grizzlies and then they give us the Mallards. Switch it around or something. I don't know. But it's just kind of interesting to see that there's that team down there, and based upon the logo and the name, you would think somehow it'd be connected to the Ducks, but it's not.
Would have been cool for them to make an effort to get the Mallards as their ECHL team, but obviously there's a lot that goes into it. But yeah, Vegas has to build their minor league system. They obviously announced earlier, about a couple of weeks ago now, that the Chicago Wolves are going to be their AHL affiliate, now that the Mallards are going to be their ECHL affiliate. So they've got that all settled. I still don't know how their AHL team is going to work out. Obviously, they're going to be able to, they've signed 3 guys now. I think Shipachyov's most likely going to play in the NHL. They have Reed Duke, and they signed a guy out of the Czech Republic a couple of days ago. Those guys will probably play in the AHL, and then Shipachyov will play in the NHL. And then, obviously, not every guy they draft in the expansion draft is going to be able to play on their opening night roster, so some of those guys will go. Possibly some of the guys they draft in this year's draft, but that's doubtful. Most of them will go back and play junior. So it'll be interesting to see how they work it out. I'm not sure if they're sharing those teams with the current teams. St. Louis was Chicago was St. Louis's AHL affiliate last season. I'm not sure if they're sharing the team or not. That'll be something I'd have to look into, but it'll be interesting to see how they work their system out this year.
And then with all this, when this gets ironed out, basically on the 21st, as you talked about, then we go to the 23rd and the 24th for the regular NHL draft. And with that, you wrote a couple articles. You talked about the Ducks picks and who they might get. If you haven't read them yet, they're on the website, thepucknetwork.com/Anaheim. Or you can go to DucksNPucks.com. Either one will get you to the page. And on there's a few articles that Eddie's published, along with some of the player reviews that we're doing. We've been doing those every year, so those are been posted there as well. And then looking in the draft, what picks do the Ducks have, Eddie, and who are maybe a couple players that the fans should kind of look out for and see if they'll get taken in the early rounds, either by the Ducks or maybe another team?
Yeah, so the Ducks, obviously losing their first round pick in the deal for Patrick Eaves. Now they draft at 2 in the second round and 1 in the third round. That's the only ones I covered. I just covered the first 3 rounds, but they've got a pick at number 50, a pick at number 61, and then the pick at 92. And I think there's still some good players. The draft this year is a little bit crazy. Really, after the first round, it can go anywhere. I've seen guys get ranked as high as early second round, and then in some mock drafts they're undrafted or they're outside the top 150. So it's a crazy year this year. As for the first second round pick, number 50, there's a couple guys. Obviously, I have a whole list of them on the website, and you can check it out there. But there's a couple guys that I think if they're available, the Ducks should take, and one of them I think the Ducks are definitely looking for forwards, either goal scoring forwards or good centers to stock their system up. And I think a guy that they could look to is Filip Chytil, plays in the Czech Republic. He's a goal scoring winger. Very creative player. Very fast, and from what I've seen from him, he has all the tools to make the jump to the NHL. He just needs to add some more strength. So he's a couple seasons away, but he's a pretty good project, and has some decent size that the Ducks could work with. And I think the other guy on that pick is if the Ducks, it's probably more likely they won't go this route, but if they do decide to get a defenseman, there's a kid out of Finland. His name's Robin Sallow. I think he's the exact type of prospect the Ducks need to have in their system. Obviously, we've seen guys like Theodore come up and Montour come up, and they're more offensive defensemen. This guy, a very solid two-way guy, but his defensive positioning, the way he reads the game, he's a very good defensive defenseman, great in his own zone. He's got some size. I think he's a good guy that they could bring in the system if they decide to draft another defenseman. But as we know, the Ducks are usually the team to draft the best guy available. And I think more than likely than not, that would be a forward in the first round. As for the next second round pick, 61 overall, there's a ton of guys available here that could be ranked higher than they really are. There's guys ranked as high as 29, so in the first round, and then some guys are ranked as low as 100. So again, showing the parity in this draft. But there's a guy out of Sweden. Obviously, the Ducks love the draft out of Sweden, but his name is Marcus Davidson, a really reliable two-way centerman. Doesn't have overly exciting offensive skills right now. Doesn't have a really deadly, hard, accurate shot, but he's got the tools to get to the NHL. It's always great to see a guy come out and be a dominant two-way center before he's in the NHL. And I think there's a real good chance that the Ducks could draft this guy. He's ranked as high as late first round, so it'll be interesting to see if he's still available. But I think if he is, this is a guy they have to take. And then as for the last pick in the third round, there's a couple options I listed here, but I'll just focus on one. I think there's a kid out of Ottawa in the OHL. His name's Austin Keating. He played great 5-on-5, and that's something you love to see out of a guy in his draft here. A lot of guys will produce a lot of power play points, and their 5-on-5 is limited, but he had 32 primary points during 5-on-5 in the season, which is more than a couple first rounders and a couple early second rounders. And he played very well this season with his teammate Sasha Chmlevski in Ottawa, and they were really great, and they were the reason the Ottawa that made the playoffs in the OHL this season. So I think he's a real late round gem that you could possibly get. If he's available for the Ducks at their third round pick, I think they have to go for him. I mean, he's only ranked as high as 77 at times, and there's a possibility he could be available for the Ducks down at 92. So I think if he is, they have to go out and try and get this guy.
So there you have it. Eddie looked over a whole bunch of stuff. I appreciate the work you did. I know you went through a lot of stuff to come up with that article and put things together. So if you haven't checked it out, like I said, go on to thepucknetwork.com or DucksNPucks.com, and you will find the article. It's one of the more recent ones on there where Eddie goes through and he talks about some of those names that he mentioned. And there's little charts that talk about, where the players are born, their physical, attributes and whatnot, and then a little blurb about each one. So we're not saying that those will be the picks, but those are some ones that, keep your eye on them. They may be ones that the Ducks could be looking at, or they may end up picking them. So there's that. As we talked about, we got the expansion draft, the regular draft coming up. A lot of stuff, in this month of June. And, we'll move on to basically the last segment where, this is the chance where you guys interact with us and you ask all these questions and we go through them. And Eddie and I either debate or agree on, well, usually agree on, but we talk about the stuff that you guys, want to talk about. So one of the questions we had, this is kind of an interesting one, Eddie. We talked about it before. We had Matt, he asked about Paul Kariya. And you remember when the Ducks were making those orange crosses on all the numbers when they were winning the games in the playoffs, that we got to see Kariya appear and cross out the number 9, obviously. And so some of the people ask, if we think he'll come back to the organization, if we'd like to see his number retired. So as far as coming back to the organization, I don't know if he'll do that, Eddie. I'm not sure. I mean, it was great to see him in the building doing that. And yes, I would like to see his number retired. But as far as having an active role with the team, I'm not really sure that would happen.
Yeah, I don't think so either. I mean, there's a lot of hostility between Kariya and the NHL in general, and especially with the Ducks and some Ducks fans still. I know a lot of people have really turned the page and are welcoming him back, and a lot of people are happy to see him come back in the video, and I was included in one of those. And I really love to see him come back, but as for his number getting retired, I'm not sure. I think if anybody was next to get their number retired, I think it would have to be him. An outside chance, obviously, to Jaguar, and then eventually, obviously, Getzlaf and Perry would be guys you would be talking about down the road. But for coming back and having a role in the organization, whether it be something similar to what Selaney's done in the past, or be an assistant coach or a scout or anything like that, I don't see it happening. It just doesn't seem to be what he wants. This is the first time really I've seen him out in any kind of media in a long time, in any respect to being involved with the Ducks or with the National Hockey League. So that was surprising for sure. I think it's a good first step, but we're a while away from him having any significant role.
Yeah, I agree. And I was happy to see him. And I think you're right. A lot of people have turned the page fan wise. I mean, obviously there's still some, animosity, but I think in general, it's been, a majority are more happy to see him. So we have Daniel here. He asks about the kind of going to the expansion draft. He talks about injuries. I know some people have brought this up about, how our players exposed and whatnot. And he touches on obviously Lindholm and Vatanen because of their shoulder issues and the surgeries that they had. And he wonders if they're exempt from the expansion draft. And the answer to that, Eddie, and you know this, is no, they're not exempt. It's not really the injuries that matter. It's all about the games played and whether or not they're under contract, for a certain amount of time. So that's how it works out. It doesn't matter if they're injured or not. I mean, like you talked about, it may matter as far as the Ducks trying to trade people, but not as far as exposure goes.
Yeah, no. I mean, if they were injured in the season and they came up short of the games needed to play, then they would be they wouldn't be exposed. But no, I mean, as of right now, the injuries occurred after the season. They've already filled the requirements to be exposed for the expansion draft. So if the Ducks were to leave a guy like Lindholm or Vatanen exposed, Vegas would be able to pick them up, and I'm sure that's not something they want to do, especially with all the rumors we've heard around trading Vatanen. So no, they're definitely going to want to protect Lindholm and avoid him getting picked up by Vegas.
Now, looking at, let's see here. The next question we have is Greg talking about the playoffs. He talks about, kind of goes back to Carlyle Boudreau, that whole debate, and he wonders, did Carlo help the Ducks, get to another level, not be as complacent in the playoffs? And do we think that Boudreau was part of the shortcomings, responsibility for those in the previous seasons? And I kind of have a mixed thing. I mean, yes, I think Carlisle did come in and help the team get them to a better level. I mean, obviously we talked about the shortcomings on special teams, but I think the thing that you and I had talked about way back in the beginning of the season was what kind of Carlisle were we going to get? Were we going to get the old Randy, or were we going to get a new one? And I think we got a newer one that did study the game, did realize he needed to make changes in certain things, and it did work out. So I think Carlisle did help the team in that regard. And obviously the Ducks did win a Game 7, this year, and they had that crazy comeback on Catella, obviously with the 3 goals in the final 3+ minutes of that game against the Oilers. So I agree with that. As far as Boudreau being the one to blame, I think with Bruce, I think the biggest thing is just those game sevens. I don't know what it was, but he'd only won one out of I can't remember the exact number, but 7 or 8 or so. And I just think that was the hard thing for him, Eddie. I think that's what was kind of a shortcoming. He's a great regular season coach. He's still a good coach in the playoffs. He just couldn't get over the hump.
Yeah, and you saw it this year with Bruce too in Minnesota. The really underwhelming playoffs in the first round against the Blues, and they end up getting eliminated. And really, it just seems to be a trend. And it's hard to put your finger on what it is, but playoff success for Bruce Boudreau teams just doesn't seem to be there. I don't know why. It's hard not to put it on him with the amount of times that it's happened, but for Randy Carlyle, I think he deserves some credit for where they got this year. Obviously, a lot of it has to go on the players and Getzlaf, and obviously the general manager as well, bringing in the guys necessary to make the run. But Carlyle is a big part of that, and they really thrived under his system. I think he made a lot of calls with switching the lineup, like we mentioned earlier, and he really did a good job and guiding this team to where they needed to go. And they played an excellent Game 7 against the Oilers and broke the curse. And obviously, eventually injuries and just poor special teams and a number of things caught up to them in the series against the Nashville Predators, and they ended up getting eliminated. But I think he deserves a lot of credit, and really, I think it's tough to blame Bruce for the shortcomings in previous years, but we've seen it time and time again. The playoffs are a different animal for him, and he seems not to be able to get past it.
Yeah, and I warned those poor Minnesota fans. I told them, I said, you're all happy when they got him. I said, you're going to be happy in the regular season, but let's see what happens in the playoffs. I mean, I honestly, but no, all kidding aside, I really wanted him to, I thought Minnesota would do well, and I wanted to see him do well. And it's unfortunate, but, like you said, the playoffs, another animal. So, let's see. We have a couple other questions here. A lot of people are asking about the goalie situation, Eddie, which, you and I talked about this last week. They're asking about who's going to be the backup. Is it going to be Enroth? What's happening with Bernier? And of course, that's still all up in the air. Talking about playing also good in the regular season and not in the playoffs. That's what happened with Bernier this year. So it kind of falls on the same theme there. But I don't know if the Ducks will bring him back, Eddie. To me, you talked about some of the other names out there that they could bring up. I mean, I'm happy with Enroth. I thought Enroth did great, for us down in San Diego. So I'd be happy to see him come up. But if Bernier is gone and they don't pull up Enroth, who are a couple of names that you would like to see maybe the Ducks try to look for as backups to Gibson?
Yeah, I think Enroth is an option, and we mentioned this last time. There's a couple guys, obviously with Budaj not being an option anymore, he's not really on the table, but there's Anders Nilsson who played for Buffalo last season. I think he's a top option for them. Had the highest save percentage of UFA goalies, 9.24, I believe. Chad Johnson's a guy who's available. If you want to go that route, I believe Brian Elliott's even a guy who's available, and he struggled in Calgary this season. But we've seen what he can do in a team like with the Blues, who have a solid defense in front of them. So there's an option in him there. If he doesn't want too much money, you can have a really good veteran, established goaltender who's proved that he can play in the regular season and in the playoffs as your backup. So he's an option there as well. And I don't know if Calgary is going to go back to him or not. But those are some options there, and I think that there's a couple of different guys the Ducks could look at, and Enroth is definitely one of the guys on the table for them. And it's an interesting thing. Obviously, it's not the big headlines surrounding the Ducks right now, but I think it should be. It's something that they're going to need. Obviously, Gibson is the number one guy, and he's going to play the majority of the games next season. But we've seen, when he goes down, the Ducks need a reliable guy to fill the role. And Bernier did well during the regular season, and it's hard to really harp on him, but when you look at that Game 6 over and over again, it's tough not to blame him.
Yeah, I mean, he was 21-7-4 in the regular season. He comes in Game 5 when Gibson goes out. He doesn't play great, but he doesn't play terrible. Gives up a couple goals in that game, and then, like you said, Game 6. And he just 4 goals on 16 shots, and you got to sit there and go, what the hell? And the Ducks had pounded Nashville in that Game 6 with 40+ shots and couldn't get it done. It's unfortunate. And, kind of interesting, Eddie, we've talked about all this hockey stuff so far. There's still the Stanley Cup Final going on. And you want to talk about goalies not doing well right now. What in the world is going on with Rene? I mean, he's given up 8 goals in the first 2 games, and Pittsburgh's up 2-0, Eddie. And it looks like Pittsburgh's rolling. I mean, I think Nashville still win some games here, but God, what happened to Rene? And where was this in the series against the Ducks?
I know, and really all throughout the playoffs, his save percentage has slowly gone down each series. It was amazing against Chicago. Then it was still good against St. Louis, still good against the Ducks, but going down. And now in this one, it's just way down. And in the first 2 games, I think he has under an 800 save percentage, which is just awful in the first 2 games. And he hasn't looked good. I honestly thought Nashville could have won that first game. Um, Pittsburgh didn't have a shot on goal for like 35 minutes or something like that.
It's something crazy
Yeah,
like that.
and I mean, I thought they could have won that game, and he just let in a couple bad goals, and that's the story. And in game two, it's kind of the same thing. They lose, and you can't blame him for everything, but he hasn't looked good. Save percentage hasn't been there. He hasn't been the same guy that he was in all 3 series before this, and they're going to need him if they're going to win these next 2 games. I think they have to win these next 2 games at home. Pittsburgh did what they had to do, won both games in Pittsburgh. Nashville's going to have to come out and win both these games at home, or they're going to be on the brink. And I think it's going to be very difficult to beat this Pittsburgh team 3 times in a row or 4 times in a row if they end up losing tonight. So he's going to have to come out tonight and in the next game and play out of his mind if they're going to have a chance of getting back in this thing.
So if you're Nashville, you're good with putting in Rene again to go with Game 3. You think that there's just no other choice. That's what they got to do.
I think you have to. I mean, he's played all playoffs. He's had some bad games. Now I think this is the first time in the playoffs this year that he's had back-to-back really poor games.
Mm-hmm.
But even against the Ducks, he let in. There was a goal that he let in on Richie, where Richie just launched it over his head and he just missed.
Mm-hmm.
There's a couple of bad goals in the Ducks series too, and he came back every game and played. And obviously he played great in that series too. But I think it's hard to put in a guy like UC Saros. He's a young guy. He had a decent regular season, but I think it's very difficult to throw him in and be like, hey, here's your first playoff start in the NHL. It's going to be in a Game 3 of a Stanley Cup Final that we have to win. I think that's difficult to do for a guy like that. I think Rene, I'd be surprised if he didn't start it tonight. If you lose this game and he plays bad, then maybe we talk about UC Saros. I think you probably have to go with the backup then. But as for tonight, I'd be surprised if he didn't start.
Yeah, I agree with you. I would still go with Rene and Ned. I don't think you changed it out. It seemed like in those 2 games, too, that there was just these periods of time, only maybe, 5 to 6 or 7 minutes where the Penguins just poured it on. In Game 1, it was the end of the first period, and they scored all those goals and put Nashville on the back burner, even though then, like you said, after that, they for whatever reason, Pittsburgh couldn't get a shot on goal in the whole second period, which is just crazy to me. And they still end up winning that game. And then in Game 3, Game 2, it's 1-1 going into the third period. And then again, Pittsburgh goes nuts. They score 4 goals in like 5 or 6 minutes. One of them gets taken away, but they still end up, blowing out Nashville in that game. But overall, it's been kind of strange. It's been a weird 2 games, Eddie, because to me, Nashville hasn't played that terribly. It's just they've had these little lapses in time here and there. And then otherwise, they play great. But Pittsburgh being Pittsburgh, they've taken advantage.
We've seen that with the Ducks too in the regular season.
Yep.
I mean, there was a trend there we were talking about where we just couldn't understand how they were playing. For 5 minutes, They stopped playing, and the game against Columbus where they got scored on 4 times, and there's a couple other games like that during the regular season where they just played bad for about 5 minutes, and the rest of the game they played great, but they dug themselves such a big hole they just couldn't get back into it, and that seems to be the trend for these first 2 games. Of the Stanley Cup Finals for Nashville. And I mean, how do you get out of that? We didn't know how the Ducks would get out of it, and they just miraculously managed a way to not let 4 goals in 5 minutes near the end of the season. Nashville's going to have to figure it out on the fly here and try and handle this Pittsburgh offense, who are definitely taking advantage of their chances. The fact that they barely got any shots on goal in Game 1. And they took advantage of that, like you said, that 5 to 10 minute period in the third period where they ended up getting 4 goals. So it's going to be difficult, I think. Obviously, everybody's playing well. Jake Gensel's an amazing story for the Penguins in the playoffs right now. He's playing out of his mind. Obviously Malkin and Crosby are still playing well. You've got Kunitz who stepped up lately. This is a very scary team on offense, and I'm surprised they made it this far. To be honest, I thought losing a guy like Letang at one point in the last series, losing Justin Schultz as well was going to be too much for them, and they've overcame. They've had some great goaltending from Fleury and now Matt Murray, and their offense has pulled them through the game 7 against Washington, and now up to a 2-0 series lead against Nashville.
Yeah, part of it too. They're going to have to deal with it. Looks like Nick Bonino is going to be out too. Bonino took a shot off his ankle in that game 2 on one of the blocks that he made, and they're saying he's a game time decision, but they've seen him in a boot with crutches, so I'm pretty sure he's going to be out for game 3, if not more. So they're going to have to adjust their lines a little bit like that, Eddie, and try to overcome it. But whether you hate Crosby or you hate the Penguins, whatever. I mean, I get it, how some people dislike the team, but you have to give them some credit. I mean, they've gone through all kinds of different things, Eddie, and even when they have a poor game, like especially game 1, I don't know what it is with this team, but they are able to pull out the wins no matter what's thrown their way.
Yeah, and we've talked about teams having injuries during the playoffs and how it's been too much. They've just seemed to battle through it. I believe Hagelin was out for a decent part of the first part of the first round, and maybe into the second round he was out. At one point, Sherry was a healthy scratch. Crosby went down a couple games with concussions. Letang's been out all playoffs. Schultz was hurt for a bit there. Murray was out for the first 3 rounds. Obviously, Fleury played well, but now he's back and playing well. It's insane what they've been able to do with the amount of man games that they've lost during these playoffs and significant players going down. And obviously you've seen guys like we just mentioned, and Jake Gensel, who stepped up and played amazing. Malkin's been good all playoffs. When Crosby's in the lineup, he's played well. So they've got the superstar power to get them through. But kudos to them for fighting through these injuries when a lot of teams have been struggling without their top players.
So with them up 2-0 right now, what do you think? What do you think the final will end up being? Who will win and how many games?
If Nashville doesn't win these next 2 games at home, it's got to be Pittsburgh in 5 or 6. I don't see Nashville being if they lose tonight, it's over. I don't see them being able to win 4 games in a row. If they win tonight and lose the next game at home, and Pittsburgh's up 3-1, they might win 1 game. I doubt they win 2, and even if it goes to Game 7, it's going to be very difficult to win 3 games in a row, especially winning Game 7 in Pittsburgh. A lot of these guys on Pittsburgh have been there before. They've done that. They know how to win. Nashville has to tie this series up at 2, or I think it's over.
Yeah, I agree with you. I think Nashville's got to win tonight, which I know Subban guaranteed it, so we'll see. He's pretty fired up, but Nashville does play very well at home, so I do think that they will come out and win Game 3. After that, I agree with you though. They're going to have to win Game 4. I mean, they really need to win these next 2 games. If they lose one of these 2 and they go down 3-1. Especially if they lose tonight. I mean, I really think Pittsburgh's going to take it in 5 or 6 games. So that's what we're looking at for the Stanley Cup Final. Obviously you got another week or so of hockey before it's over, but then we'll fire up all the stuff, the expansion draft and all that kind of news, which we'll be covering. We'll do the podcasts kind of as the news comes out. We decided to do one this week just because of the coaching news and then obviously all the injury news that came out after we did our last podcast, which for some reason that happens a lot, Eddie. We post stuff and then all of a sudden all this stuff gets posted by the Ducks after. But we wanted to cover all that. Some other news too related to the T-shirts and stuff that we've been doing is, we didn't make any T-shirts for a long time this year. We just didn't. We had a lot of ideas and a lot of them were just kind of whatever, so we never really made any. So we decided to do that Manson shirt, and which was another fan that had brought it to my attention, the design and all these other things. And one of the fans, Louis, on Twitter came up with the hashtag. So we thank him for doing that. And what we ended up doing is putting together a shirt, which a lot of you bought. And it was just weird, Eddie. I get this order from Mr. Manson in Canada. And it's a rather large order. I don't want to say how much, but it's a large order. And I'm sitting here going, who is this, right? And I know where Josh is from and all this stuff. So I end up sending an email and I find out that Josh's dad, Dave Manson, who also played in the NHL, ordered a whole bunch of shirts. So then I got to thinking, I'm like, you know what? It just doesn't feel right. I have the players, parents buying shirts that we made of his son. So I had a good conversation back and forth with Dave through email and whatnot. And what we decided to do is everybody that's bought a shirt, all the profit's going to go towards the Save Your Skin Foundation, which helps fight any kind of skin cancer. And it's a charity that's close to the Manson family. I talked to them and they like the idea. So we have still a handful of the shirts left on tpnhockey.com. But just so you know, if you want to buy those, donations will go to that foundation to help fight skin cancer. So it's kind of a good thing. It's just a weird thing, Eddie. Like we've talked about before, this simple idea of selling a couple of shirts and it turns into a podcast and a blog and now interaction with players' families and stuff like that. And it's just just a good experience all the way around.
Yeah, it's crazy how much it's grown and how many people we've interacted with since it started. I mean, I didn't expect any of this when I first brought the idea up, and to now have to be able to, the fact that we interviewed Solani last year, and been able to talk to Max Jones and like you said, interact with Manson's parents and everything that's gone on. It's been crazy. It's been a crazy couple of years, and we're expecting to do this for a while. So stick around. It's fun for us, and we're appreciative of everybody who tunes in every week.
Yeah, absolutely. And we can't do this without you guys. So everybody that listens and follows us and reads everything, we really appreciate it. We try to answer as many fan questions as we can and interact with you and give you as much information as possible. And, we'll probably do some more of those live Facebook broadcasts. I know we'll cover the draft too. We'll have some stuff those days as well. And try to bring you as much information when we find out. When stuff comes up, we try to get it to you as fast as we can. So, it's summertime, unfortunately. Ducks season's over, but we'll keep bringing you the news. And as always, let's go Ducks.